Well, hello and welcome to Solar Alberta's 2024 Solar Show, our 10th annual solar show. Tonight's keynote address is called the Net Zero Energy Trio. Please note that we have enabled closed captioning for this presentation. You can turn the captioning on in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be recording this session and making it available on our website and YouTube channel following the show. My name is Heather McKenzie, and I am the Executive Director at Solar Alberta. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that I'm hosting you today and working day to day from Amiskwaci Waskahegan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is located on Treaty 6 territory and the homelands of the Métis Nation. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place and home of many Indigenous peoples, including the Papachase, Nehewak or Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux, nations whose ancestors have cared for and nurtured these lands since time immemorial. We were delighted to have so many people register for this week and for this event. To start, we'd like to thank Enbridge for sponsoring the 2024 Solar Show as a whole. We're very happy and grateful to have them as sponsors. Today, we will be hearing from Vittoria Bellissimo. Following the presentation, there will be a question and answer period in which you can all participate. We will be using Zoom Q&A for questions rather than the chat box, so please enter your questions in the Q&A section. Also, please click on the little thumbs up symbols to upvote questions that you like. The entire session will wrap up in an hour and a half. I'd like to encourage you all to check out our online trade show during the week. We have listed on this slide and in the chat all the wonderful organizations who are participating in the trade show. To view their exhibitor booths, which include a listing of key solar-related services, contact info, and video introductions, please click on the link in the chat. Now, before we move forward, we're going to do a quick poll to get a sense of who we have joining us today. Please take a minute to answer the question that's popping up on your screen. There we go. And now, while some are still doing the polls, I encourage you to also take a minute to pop your name, land acknowledgement, any contact info that you're comfortable sharing in the chat now and throughout the event so that others can look you up on LinkedIn and you can stay connected. All righty. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. Let's have a look and see what the responses were. I think they're coming up soon. There we go. Aha, as I suspected. There we go. The majority of you are solar curious, which should be no surprise since we're hosting it in the evening, specifically for those who are curious. So thank you for joining us. Of course, a lot of our industry folks are here, which is no surprise given how wonderful you are as members. And of course, many of you might also be CanRIA members tonight. And I see some students in the house too. That's wonderful. So a nice mix of folks. Thank you all for attending. Just going to share a little bit about who we are before we get started. Did you know that Solar Alberta is now in its 33rd year of operation? Albertans have been excited about solar energy for quite a while. We're a nonprofit society that is dedicated to accelerating Alberta's transition to a just and sustainable energy future. We do so by advocating, educating, and serving as an industry and community hub for solar energy. Our membership is made up of over 760 individuals and 170 businesses. We provide a number of services, including managing a solar directory through our website. In this way, we act as a bridge for installers, suppliers, and other solar-related businesses to connect with their customers and clients. You can see a screenshot of the directory here on this slide and a link to it in the chat. In addition to our website services, we run a number of educational programs such as this solar show, our seminar series, and a number of in-person and online networking events as well. Please note that recordings of all of our previous solar show and seminar sessions can be found on our YouTube channel. In addition to some solar show workshops that are industry oriented, this spring we're once again running a number of online courses for solar industry professionals or those transitioning into the sector. Our courses are online Tuesday and Thursday evenings on 3 to 5 nights over 2 to 3 weeks. First up is Economics of Grid-Tied Solar PV. and you can register for all of our courses at the link provided in the chat. We are offering a new buy 3 get codes free bundle, so please check for the link about the bundle in the chat as well. Recordings to our courses are also available for sale alongside our paid workshops in the solar training video section of our website. In addition to providing education about solar, we also advocate for it. We have a number of different campaigns running currently, which include template letters that you can use to contact decision makers. Please send letters today requesting the Canada Greener Homes Grant be refinanced, requesting an end to the provincial moratorium on renewable power plants, and requesting a number of supports for solar and energy efficiency upgrades to homes and businesses in Alberta. In addition to our letter templates, we also have free Rise Up for Renewables lawn signs available for pickup in 11 municipalities across Alberta. Your support with this advocacy work is very important. You can click on the link for all of that in the chat. Now that you know a little bit about us, just want to take this opportunity to encourage you all to become members. Membership is only $35, and this week there's a 20% off discount, Solar Show discount only. So the link for memberships being put in the chat. On April 24th, we'll be hosting our annual general meeting. Just want to invite you all to sign up as members, attend, and elect your new board. There are several vacancies to fill on the board this year. If you're interested in applying, please, you're welcome to do so through our website until February 29th. With your help, we're recognizing longtime dedicated contributors to solar in Alberta by gifting them a free lifetime Solar Alberta membership. If you're currently a member and you know someone who has contributed significantly to the organization or the sector as a whole, please consider nominating them. We'll be accepting nominations until April 3rd, and the award recipients will be announced at our AGM. A list of previous recipients can also be found on our website. And new this year, we're really pleased to announce the Solar Alberta Diversity Scholarship. This scholarship is intended for equity-deserving individuals facing barriers to equal access, opportunities, and resources due to disadvantage and/or discrimination. Through the scholarship, we're seeking to promote inclusivity, amplify historically marginalized voices, and encourage diverse perspectives and participation in the solar and solar-related sector. We will be awarding $2,000 to one equity-deserving individual registered in an Alberta training program that aligns with our mission. We will be accepting applications until the end of April 30th. The successful applicant will be notified by May 31st. Eligibility details and the scholarship application are available by clicking on the link in the chat. We're very thankful to Enbridge as well for making this scholarship possible. Finally, we ask that you please consider participating in our 50-50 raffle, which is actually over $2,200 now. These will close on Friday at the end of the solar show. I'm going to do the draw live at 5 p.m. during the Solar and Friends networking event, mentoring and networking event. Additionally, please consider donating through the crowdfunding link in the chat. The Government of Alberta is matching all donations made through that link. And now, I'm delighted to get this session underway by welcoming Gatea Betty Latondra to open the 2024 Solar Show with a blessing. Miss Betty is a traditional Cree Métis woman from the Papaches Cree Nation. She is a direct descendant of Papastewo with lineage to Chief Big Bear. She grew up northeast of Amiskwaciwaskahigan, also known as Edmonton, where her Cree parents, her first teachers, traditionally lived off the land. As a result of this traditional upbringing, Ms. Betty is grounded in her Cree language and culture. Her guiding principle is Pimatiswin, or Indigenous way of life, which refers to Cree tradition and cultural identity, a strong heritage, knowing where one comes from, and therefore defining one's identity. As a highly respected Gatea, as I mentioned, was a Cree for elder, Miss Betty fulfills this role and responsibility with humility and grace. She carries the knowledge and wisdom acquired through many years of working with those who have taught her the ceremonies of her people, balancing her life from these sacred traditions. Ms. Betty knows that when we understand where we come from, we can then help all educators make a change. In addition to being a well-respected Gatea, Ms. Betty is also a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She works tirelessly with a host of different governing bodies, municipal representatives, and community agencies in striving to improve the lives of all Canadians. We are so honored to have her here with us today. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Betty. Our fourth solar show together. We sincerely appreciate your willingness to bring a blessing once again to our special event this week. And now I'll turn the mic over to you.
Nancy, good evening. It's an honor to be here once again, a fourth year. I can't believe it's gone that fast. I mean, it's been that long and it's fast. I'm very honored again, as I said, to be part of this wonderful Solar Alberta. And that I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was thinking especially yesterday, I went to lie down in the afternoon, and my bedroom window, the sun was shining on my face, and it just felt so beautiful, so peaceful. And I thought, how fortunate am I to have the warmth of the sun? And for us as Indigenous people, we know and believe that the sun is a medicine. We need the sun to, of course, to help us live. But also long ago, just a brief little story, when our babies, before doctors, etc., hospitals, when children had our babies, sometimes came and had, when they had yellow jaundice, and we didn't have no heating lamps or anything like that. My grandmother being delivering babies. And the babies would have, some of them would have jaundice, yellow jaundice. And she would always tell the parents, the women, hold your baby to the sun, because sun is the medicine, and it won't have the yellow jaundice when the babies turn yellow. So I was really, really thinking about all these things yesterday as I was lying there. I was so grateful, amongst everything else that's happening in this world, all the horrors we hear, and how we still have such beauty when we look out our door, look out the window, and just to know each and every one of us is just a tiny little speck on this earth, and that we are so worthy of all the blessings we get from what's out there. And I'm grateful for that. I was grateful that I was a chosen one to be part of this journey today. And as I was thinking about many people, many things, I thought about, we've made it as human beings. We forget sometimes we're one race, the human race, and that we come together. However we come, wherever we come from, we're not very different at all. And each and every one of us at this moment, maybe for me anyway, I have loved ones that are sick, loved ones maybe that are dying of different diseases. But then there's the other part where children are being born, a whole new generation's coming. And that, to say thank you every day at this moment, in your heart, in your mind, you think about just that one, or your families and yourself, especially yourself. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of anybody else. I ask our Creator, our loving God, however you choose to say that, just to continue to love us, and that this journey will soon be over, and that life is like a flash, it's gone. But we must remember that to take care of ourselves. I humbly ask our Creator, I say Creator, to give us that strength, of wisdom, the knowings of who we are, and therefore to help each other as we are tonight, all listening. And when I pray, when I'm asked to do a blessing, I pray in a way that as if I'm talking to another being, and I know there is another being that I can give thanks to. So with that, I'll say a quick prayer in my language, Cree language. Mamutawi maokiskiskos. Ektiutsinu tawi pewitika moya. Ekanawemia, Tabaganawia, Pakwinamoya, Kamioasik Kisigao, Katawasik, Ewapatamanu tawi, Saki tuan waputuan Pakio, Banangan tawi. That each and every one of us will be granted just that little bit of blessing. When we ask, we don't ask for very much. We say, thank you, Creator, for taking care of us today, and that we'll be able to see, hear all those beautiful senses of gifts that we carry, but never to forget ourselves. So we're so busy, and to say thanks. I thank all of you for listening to me. And I would talk, the way I'm talking is how I talk to my God or my Creator, as I understand that. So I just say thank you very much for listening to me, and that your conference and what you're going to be doing this weekend is just amazing, that you can make change. I always say I'm like a little hummingbird, a big forest fire, all the animals are running away. And she went and grabbed a little bit of water, a drop in the forest. And they were saying, that's not going to help. Why are you doing that? And she said, well, every drop helps. So I love that little story. So be kind to yourselves and those around you. We're all in this together. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for everything. I ask this in Creator's name for you all, that you be home and safe in your home fires. With that, I say thank you. Hi. Thank you.
Hi, Miss Betty. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And now, like a little hummingbird, I think I too will try and bring a drop and have an impact by welcoming our keynote speaker for this evening, Vittoria Bellissimo. Vittoria is the president and CEO of CanREA, the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, the voice of Canada's wind, energy, solar energy, and energy storage industry. She was previously the executive director of the Industrial Power Consumers Association of Alberta and worked in renewable energy procurement at both the Ontario Ministry of Energy and the Ontario Power Authority, now the ISO. Vittoria previously served on the boards of Energy Efficiency Alberta and Emissions Reduction Alberta. She is also a founding board member of Power and Women. She holds an MSc in Environmental Sustainability from the University of Edinburgh and is a licensed professional engineer from Queen's with a BSc from Queen's University. Vittoria is based in Calgary, and I thank you very much for joining us today, Vittoria. I'm going to turn the mic and the screen share over to you now. Feel free to camera on.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to do a quick screen share. How does that work, Heather? You can see it okay?
Beautiful. Yep, it's looking great.
Great.
Turn it over.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to present today and the opportunity to participate in the dialogue. I'm joining you from the Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta, as Heather said, and I was asked to present on wind, solar, and storage, the net zero energy trio, and I will do so, but my sub goal this evening is also to show you as many graphs as I possibly can in 30 minutes. It's a wild and beautiful time in electricity, and the electricity transition will be bumpy. And we need to be analytical and thoughtful and think about the whole electricity system. So I'm going to try to show you a piece of that this evening. If we can advance the slides.
I'm not sure if it's
Okay, let's
taking
try a new
forward.
share.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Good?
Oh, there we go. Looking
Okay.
good.
It wouldn't be 2024 without a few tech problems. So we're going to start with a bit of an intro about what the Canadian Renewable Energy Association is and what we do. I'm going to cover greenhouse gas emissions and what the challenge looks like, both for Canada and for Alberta. We're going to talk about the Alberta electricity supply mix and how it's changing. And then we're going to go into the characteristics of wind, solar, and energy storage and talk a little bit about the future of the electricity system. And then we'll have lots of time for questions. So looking forward to that section. Okay, well, CANREA was actually formed quite a bit later than Solar Alberta. Yeah, Solar Alberta being 33, we're a lot younger. We were formed in July 1st, 2020, when the Canadian Wind Energy Association merged with the Canadian Solar Industries Association and took on the expanded mandate of energy storage. So we are the voice of the wind energy, solar energy, and energy storage solutions that will power Canada's energy future. We have over 350 member companies active in these industries across manufacturers, installers, developers, service providers, and supply chain partners. And we do stakeholder advocacy and public engagement. And we are working to create the conditions for a modern energy system. We work with sister organizations such as Solar Alberta, and I'm so thrilled to be here today to participate in the Solar Show. So this is a chart that shows Canada's GHG emissions by sector. It's from the National Inventory Report, which is always a couple of years behind, but they will release new data in April. This is for 2021, and you can see that electricity accounted for about 7.7% of Canada's GHG emissions, a total of, for Canada, of around 670 megatons. And the really interesting story is that we're doing well in electricity. In 2021, there were 52 megatons of carbon associated with electricity. But if you look back to 2015, it was 83.7 megatons. So this number is going down, and we should all be proud of that. This shows the Alberta situation, and it's a little bit dated. This is 2020, and 2021 numbers are available. But you can see that in 2020, electricity accounted for 11% of our greenhouse gas emissions here in Alberta. In 2021, that was 28 megatons. And if you look back to 2015, it was 49 megatons. So we're making some good and interesting progress here, and you'll be able to see that on the next slide. I really like this graph because it's a visual representation of what's going on. So I'm going to break it down for you. This shows the well, this, first of all, is from the Market Surveillance Administrator. They produce quarterly reports looking at the market. And so this is the Q3 quarterly report from 2023. So this covers July to September for the past 7 years. So you can see 2017 all the way through to 2023. And it shows the estimated distribution of the hourly average emissions intensity of the grid. And you can see as it's moving closer and closer to the left-hand side of the screen, the grid is getting cleaner and cleaner. So in 2017, the mean hourly emissions intensity for this quarter was 0.77 tons of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. And then if you look all the way down to the bottom at 2023, we've reduced that to 0.45 tons of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. And that's progress. And that progress is largely related to two things. One is the conversion of the coal fleet to natural gas. And we're not all the way there, but we're getting there. And the second is the increase of renewable energy on the Alberta electricity system. This is a visual representation of how lucky we are in Alberta. And as Ms. Betty said at the beginning of the blessing today, how fortunate are we to have the sun? And this is where we're going to learn how fortunate we actually are. So these are maps of resources, and anything on either map that is in green or yellow represents the resource that is economic based on today's technologies. And anything you see on these maps that is orange or red is among the best resource in all of North America. So we are very, very fortunate here in Alberta. So starting with wind, Alberta is currently home to 45 wind energy projects and 4,481 megawatts of installed capacity. Alberta is also home on the solar side to 43 utility-scale solar PV projects, totaling 1,650 megawatts. And then if we look at smaller scale projects, so Alberta is home to over 223 megawatts of small scale solar PV at more than 17,500 sites. And that's becoming a bigger and bigger success story. I have to update those numbers for this slide all the time. CanRIA will have a data report coming out very, very shortly, hopefully within the week or next week. And we will be able to show more of a picture of growth associated with 2023. But I'll give you a bit of a spoiler on that. In 2022, Alberta actually represented about 75% of the growth in wind and solar across the country. And in 2023, it's even higher. Alberta accounted for around 92% of the growth in installed capacity across the country. And a lot of that is due to the existence of corporate power purchase agreements as a financing mechanism. So Alberta actually has 3,300 megawatts of corporate PPAs that have been signed and deals that have been done within the province. And that's a really big success story. So I want to have a little bit more information for you today about what investment is associated with these projects. So I'm going to give you examples related to 100 megawatt facilities just to make them easier to appreciate. So if you took a 100 megawatt wind facility, that would include $175 million in project development and construction and more than 300 job years in construction. And if you look at a 100 megawatt solar PV facility, that would include $125 million in investment and approximately 200 full-time equivalent jobs in construction. And some other community benefits of a 100 megawatt renewable project, either wind or solar, include roughly $1 million in annual property taxes for host communities and roughly $500,000 in royalty payments to landowners. So I'd like to move on now, I think, to energy storage. And I will be saying a whole lot of good things about energy storage later on in the presentation. But Alberta is home to 10 larger energy storage projects. There are also some behind the meter storage that you can read all about in our data report. And there's 190 megawatts of larger installed energy storage capacity in the system. It's all batteries right now, but you should know that there are lots of other types of energy storage that are already in existence and in development, and that includes new battery chemistries, pumped hydro storage, compressed air, mechanical, thermal. And I will, as I mentioned, be singing the praises of energy storage later on, and we'll talk about how well it has served Alberta, particularly when we're in very, very cold weather conditions like we saw a couple weekends ago. So this graph here shows the year-end gross generation capacity by technology. And I put it here so that we could get a sense of what the supply mix looks like. So first, let's look at the overall generation. And I'll just tell you that this graph comes from the Alberta Electric System Operator. They produce an annual market statistics report, and they'll be releasing the next year's in probably in March. So this is all the way up to 2022. So it is actually quite dated when it comes to renewables because of how much growth we had last year. But we'll use it anyway. So at the end of 2022, we had 18,344 megawatts of capacity on the Alberta electric system. And that actually represents quite a significant amount of growth. It was a 6.5% increase over our 2021 numbers. We added quite a bit of capacity, and that includes 402 megawatts of solar, 1,349 megawatts of wind, and 20 megawatts of storage. Again, that's 2022 numbers. There's two major areas I want to draw your attention to on this graph. If you look at the bar charts, the first one to come up on your left-hand side is coal, and you can really see the decrease here. So for contrast, in 2018, we had 5,568 megawatts of coal-fired generation on the Alberta electricity system. And in 2022, we had at the end of 2022, we had 820 megawatts. So it's going away, and it's going away very quickly. And you'll see that even more at the end of 2023. You can also see the dramatic increase in wind and in solar, and you can't see storage as well, but I can tell you it is going up, and we're going to need a lot more of it going forward. And interestingly, in 2022, because wind was the largest of the renewable representation at that point in time, and still is, wind actually served 8% of Alberta's internal load, which is kind of the gross number of the gross load number in the province, and on average had a capacity factor of about 33% in 2022. So I'm going to change the scene just a little bit here and talk a little bit about what we call BTM or behind the meter solar. Cambria noticed that we didn't have a comprehensive Canadian market outlook, so we decided we would commission one, and we did, and Dunsky did it for us, and we wanted to look at a number of things. So we wanted to be able to demonstrate the need for BTM solar in a net zero future. We wanted to quantify the benefit for BTM solar deployment in Canada. We wanted to describe the benefits that BTM solar brings to our economy and our electricity system. And we wanted to be able to define the actions that stakeholders need to take to unlock BTM solar potential. I won't spoil the entire report for you, but I will just show two graphs that I think help lay out the picture for all of us. So if you look today, this graph shows years between on the x-axis shows the years between 2023 and 2050. And on the y-axis, it shows the annual electricity generation from behind the meter solar in terawatt hours. So today we're at about 0.2% of the total electricity consumption being served by BTM, so 1.5 terawatt hours. And where we need to be to achieve a net zero economy in 2050 is between 2% of total electricity consumption and 4% of total electricity consumption served by behind the meter solar. So that's between 24 terawatt hours and 48 terawatt hours. So it's a big task, it's a big undertaking, it's an enormous increase. And we have a lot of work to do. I just wanted to break it down by province for you. So this graph will show you the breakdown of the growth that is needed in capacity numbers now, so installed capacity instead of energy. And the bottom blue is Ontario, but after that we have Alberta. And I can just tell you that we're going from where we are today, and you'll recall it wasn't just behind the meter, but behind the meter and distributed sort of small scale PV is around 223 megawatts right now, and we need to get to 9 gigawatts in 2050. So it's, again, a very large undertaking, and a very large undertaking within Alberta. All right, so continuing on our quest to bombard you with graphs, this graph shows the hourly variable, so wind and solar generation in August of 2023. And again, this graph came from the Alberta Market Surveillance Administrator in their Q3 quarterly report. And it shows the consequences on the grid of variable generation. So when we have increased amounts of variable generation on the grid, there is a less predictable ramping requirement. And the ISO has actually procured more regulating reserve to enable these additional resources to come online. So our on-peak active regulating reserve went from 130 megawatts to 170 megawatts, so an increase of 40 megawatts on August 25th of 2023. The point of saying that is there are more requirements to do so, but the overall cost to customers can actually be lower to make those overall investments. It's really interesting when you look at this graph. It covers all of August on the x-axis. I'm just going to take a tea break, timeout. So if you look on the x-axis, it covers the whole month of August of 2023. And then if you look on the y-axis, that's generation in megawatts. And the variability is considerable, right? You go from 0 all the way up to almost 3,500. And in order to do that, we need to make changes to the rest of the system to enable the incorporation of these resources. So I'm going to move along now to show you some interesting solar profiles. So this is this graph here comes from the ISO in their annual statistics report. And it shows the average hourly output of solar generation for different periods of 2022. So peak generation usually occurs between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. But in the summer and what we call the shoulder season, so fall and spring, you actually see a couple of extra hours of peak generation. In this graph, the x-axis is we call it hour ending, but it's basically all of the hours of the day, all 24 hours of the day. And on the y-axis, you see the capacity factor. So the top line is May to August, which is the summer. And you can see the capacity factors associated with it, which are the highest in the year. And then the next lower down line is what we call the shoulder season. So it includes March to April and September to October. And the capacity factors are a little bit reduced. And then if you look at the lower line, which is dark blue, that's really the winter. So it's January to February and November to December. I will note that the capacity factors here are actually lower than you can expect from solar facilities because plants were commissioning in 2022, so it really did reduce the capacity factors that you saw out of the full system. I will also note here that all generation has characteristics and has limitations, and we need to start to consider what those are and how we build a robust electricity system as a whole. I was attending a CanRIA Electricity Transition Hub Summit last week, and we were talking about how to communicate the success stories and the value of wind, solar, and energy storage to people who aren't necessarily fans of these technologies. And one of the analogies that came up that I thought was really apt was a grass analogy. So if you're fortunate enough to have a lawn, you wouldn't water your lawn when it's raining, right? Because the rain and the sky is going to do it for you. So it would be very wasteful to water your lawn in the rain. And wind and solar are similar. When it's sunny, let's take all the energy we can get from the sun. And when it's windy, let's take all the energy we can get from the wind. Why wouldn't we? We're blessed with a fantastic resource of both in Alberta, and we need to start thinking about it. They're not capacity resources, they're energy resources, and they can add a whole lot of value to the electricity system, but we need to frame it in the right way, and we need to treat the rest of the system in a way that enables them. So moving along, I promised I would sing the praises of energy storage, and that's what I'm going to do right now. So this is another analogy that I got from a different conference last week, and we'll see if it flies, and it won't if you're vegetarian, but I was told that energy storage is like bacon. It goes with absolutely everything. And I really do believe that. So on this chart, we are going to talk about all of the things that energy storage can do. And there's different ways that energy storage facilities can be installed and configured. And I'm just going to walk you through them. So the first option is standalone energy storage. So you've got a storage facility and it connects directly to the electricity system and it operates solo. The second option we call load co-located. So that would be when you have an energy storage facility that connects behind the fence to a consumption site. So a large industrial, for example, would have an energy storage facility on their site. And the last option here is called generation co-located, and that's when you have an energy storage facility that's situated on site with a generation facility. So it could be any type of generation, but renewable is a very good one. So I'm just going to walk through this and explain the services that energy storage can do. So on the wire side, these are system services. Energy storage can provide capacity and peak shaving, so reduce the peak system demand. It can provide voltage support. It can provide frequency regulation, which is really important in our system, and we're going to see more of that. We can't have too many deviations in frequency to keep the grid upright. So energy storage is a real asset in being able to provide frequency responses. It can delay the investment that is needed in both transmission and distribution facilities, and that can save customers money. It can also provide congestion management for transmission and distribution, which also can help save customers money. And it can provide smoothing for renewables, so improve ramp rates and improve capabilities on the system. From a reliability perspective, storage can provide ancillary services and does a great job at that. Regulating reserve is one option. Spinning reserve, where it's already synchronized to the grid. Something that we call here supplemental reserve, which is the operating reserve that is not synchronized or not spinning, not synchronized to the grid. It can also provide black start services. So when the grid is actually down and you need to start it back up again, energy storage can be there for that. And then from an energy market perspective, it can provide a time shift or market arbitrage, so buy low, sell high, but also in that instance, it helps reduce the price at higher time periods because there's more supply available in the peak when we need it. And it can reduce demand charges for customers, and it can provide backup power, all of things that we're gonna need more of in the future. So I included this, which is a chart from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that really shows the life cycle assessments of various technology types. And I don't want to go into it in tremendous detail, but I do want to say that beyond just providing kind of low emissions energy sources, our technologies, wind, solar, and storage, are also, very, very some of the lowest life cycle impacts of any technologies out there. And you can see this on the chart, right? So you can see photovoltaic, and you can see wind energy, and you can see lithium ion battery storage. So it's a really good news story from a carbon perspective. Okay, so this is a live screenshot that I took on January 11th. And as many of you who were in the province at the time will recall, we had a very a dangerous patch of very, very, very cold conditions in Alberta a couple of weekends ago. And there were a lot of hot takes, and there was a lot of misinformation that was circulated at the time. And here's my number one take from this event. In a crisis, we really need a coordinated messaging that is very, very clear, and we need everybody to stay on message. So the message in a crisis should have been, hey, we need you to turn off all your unnecessary appliances, and we need you to do it right now because we're having problems on our power grid, and we don't know that we'll be able to meet the supply that we need to meet. We didn't necessarily see that, but actually I was really impressed on the Saturday when the kind of alert went out to everyone's cell phones. We actually managed to find 200 megawatts of electricity demand curtailed, and that helped keep the grid going. So if you participated in that and you turned out your extra lights and you didn't use your dishwasher and all of the other good things you can do to reduce consumption at that time, thank you. And it's certainly not a tool that I think we can use all the time, but it's really helpful that everybody chipped in and made that possible. There was a lot of misinformation associated with the 4 grid alerts and that extended weekend, we'll call it, around renewable energy. And it's very difficult to scream from the rooftops how it really is, but I did want to mention a couple of key items from that time period that I think are valuable to note. One is that we actually hit a new system peak on the Thursday before the grid alert started. So on the Thursday, an hour ending 18, we hit 12,384 megawatts of demand, and that was a new winter and all-time system peak. And at that time, there were over 1,000 megawatts of wind on the system helping meet that demand. And I think that's really important to note. Wind energy, when it was running, was suppressing the price, was helping put downward pressure on the electricity price, and was very helpful at that point in time. Another really important thing to note is that batteries were very, very helpful. And the ISO was actually really clever and thoughtful with how they used the batteries. So as I mentioned earlier, we had 190 megawatts of utility scale batteries on our system. And instead of just dispatching them for energy, what the ISO did is they used the batteries as frequency response to be able to pull more electricity into the province from our neighboring jurisdictions over the tie lines. And that enabled us to get more energy into the system when we needed it. And it was a really good use of the battery fleet. In addition to that, they were able to direct the battery units to discharge during the peak hour instead of having the battery companies guess when that would be. And I think that really helped the system as well. So we should be proud of our ISO for using those to a great advantage. But we had 190 megawatts. Imagine if we'd had 500. We would have had a whole lot of additional optionality. And the last thing I really want to note here is that wind and solar came to the rescue on the Monday, bringing a grid alert to an end. And the ISO managed to alert us of all of that over social media. So I think that was a good news story. And I think that helped correct some of the dialogue around, what was working and what wasn't working on the very cold weekend. There will continue to be learnings from that cold weather period. The gas fleet saw derates, and we all learned that air intake doesn't do what you think it's going to do at minus 40 degrees. It's a really different ballgame. And I think we're going to continue learning going forward, but I do think it's necessary in the moment to stick to the crisis message and resolve the crisis instead of sharing in the hot take parade. The lessons from the winter here really are that we hit our winter peaks when solar isn't available. We hit our winter peaks in the evening when it's dark out, not all the time, but often. But wind can be very helpful if it's online during the system peaks. And in addition to that, energy storage is very, very helpful. And we would do a lot better to have more energy storage on the Alberta electricity system. So that's the winter. Let's take a look at the summer. So this graph comes from the Market Surveillance Administrator, and it's not the summer peak. It's a tight summer situation. The actual summer peak was 11,721 megawatts, and it was hit in June of 2021. But I think this illustrates how our resources can help in the summertime. So let's take a look. In this time period, which is August 28th to the end of August, there were two what we call EEA or Energy Emergency Alert events. So the first one was on the 28th of August from 1508 to 2003. And the second one was on the 29th of August from 1725 to 2002. The temperature at this point in Calgary reached 31 degrees Celsius. And we had a whole bunch of different conditions. So we had increased demand from air conditioning. We had reduced supply from thermal assets. Thermal assets, which coal and gas do get derated in the summertime as well. But we had some concerns with various assets on the system. We also had lower wind generation. And we had a transmission outage in BC, which was reducing the import supply that we had available to us. So you can see in this chart, the solar is yellow, surprise, surprise, and the wind is green. And I'll just let you know that in this event, no firm load was actually shed. So we didn't have any rolling blackouts. We didn't tell anybody to turn anything off besides asking them nicely. But we did actually have to use our contingency reserves. So contingency reserves were directed to provide energy. And you can see on this chart, the prices actually corresponds to the right-hand y-axis, which is S&P system marginal price. And on the left-hand axis, it's the generation in megawatts. And it's just over the time period. So the lessons from this really are that, wind is actually generally low during energy emergency alert or EEA events because they're typically during high temperatures or low temperatures, and the prevailing weather conditions can cause low wind speeds. It's not always the case, but it can often be the case. But solar in the summer can actually be be very helpful. And you can see that in these graphs. So the solar didn't cover the entire emergency alert conditions and time periods, but it did help. And it helped so we could do other things to remedy the problem. And then the last lesson here is that batteries and energy storage can be very, very helpful. And as I said previously, we need more storage on the system, and I will continue to say that until we get more storage on the system. Okay, so this is the key messages that I really want to leave you with. And the first one is that in the future, we will have a diversified supply mix. And that includes wind solar storage, demand response, interties, combustion turbines with new fuels, geographic diversity of resources, long duration energy storage, which everyone is working on right now and we really do need going forward. And it will help us with seasonal storage, right? So you can store through large sections of the year. And we're going to need it. We don't know what weather events are coming. We don't know what drought is coming our way. We don't know what forest fires are coming our way. In the age of climate change, we're going to need a whole lot of diversification. And in addition to that, we're moving towards much more electrification, which will help us clean up not just electricity, of course, but buildings and heavy industry and transportation. So we're going to need to provide electricity to many, many more entities than we have in the past. Second, I will say that wind and solar and storage are and will continue to be critical components of our electricity supply mix. And there isn't really another way around it. They're the most affordable types of new generation. You're going to see other things come on the system. But if we want to build affordable electricity systems across the country, we're going to need to rely on wind, solar, and storage in a big way. And last, but certainly not least, I would say that we need to figure out how to optimize all three of these electricity resources. And one of the takeaways that I had from the Electricity Transition Hub that we hosted last week was this line: we must make a century's worth of power system progress in this decade. And I think that really captures the critical nature of what we're doing and the changes that have to happen in a very short time span. So as I said at the beginning, the energy transition is going to be bumpy. We have some great resources at our fingertips. They're not the only things we're going to need, but we're going to need to use them right. We're going to need to use them in a very clever way going forward. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will invite Heather back up to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much. That was super informative. I have learned a great deal, and I'm sure our audience has too. Just a reminder for everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat, and you can also upvote each other's questions there. I'm going to be grabbing from the most upvoted questions. But while you're entering your questions, I have a couple just to get us started. Also, I enjoyed your anecdote about, I think you said energy storage is the bacon in that it tastes good with everything. Well, that made me laugh out loud because as a vegetarian, I have actually heard that bacon is the gateway meat. So you might also want to play around with that a bit. Anyways, I haven't been too tempted myself, but I do love storage regardless. Before we get started, just want to do a couple definitions here. You used some awesome words that probably some of our audience knew and some didn't. So just wanted to touch on a couple of them. A couple folks in the Q&A have asked what is the behind the meter, so BTM, and is that the same as the micro generation? So, you know, we often at Solar Alberta, we often talk about solar on homes and businesses. That comes up a lot for our demographics, but maybe you could just explain what all you include when you say BTM.
Yeah, that's what it is. So behind the meter is anything that is used on site from a customer, and that can include homes and businesses and industrials and commercial customers. So anything that's behind the meter. They're
generating it and using it on site, but also in Alberta exporting a bit, which is nice. Not everywhere has that opportunity. So
that's true.
Great. Also, you talked about capacity factor. This is a fun concept that has taken me 3 years to even start to understand. So if you could maybe try and explain that, knowing full well that there will be non-technical folks in the audience who might just have to let that one sit for a few years.
Yeah, that's it's a ratio of the actual electricity output over a time period for what the unit is rated at. So usually you'll have a facility and it's rated at a certain number of megawatts and it produces a certain number of megawatt hours. So it's kind of how much energy do you get for the capacity that you have available.
Right. And what
Conclusion.
I understand about it so far, and my understanding is wind and solar generally have a lower capacity factor than something like hydro, which is fairly consistent. Is that correct?
It really depends on the hydro, but yeah, I mean, wind, this one's actually kind of interesting. So solar, we used to quote capacity factors of around 15% for solar, but actually the larger solar facilities are on trackers. So they actually move with the sun and optimize with the sun. And we've gotten up to kind of 20, 25, 26% capacity factors for solar. And wind is higher than that. So I quoted the 2022 number, which was around 33% for the full wind fleet. But as I said, several facilities were commissioning at the time. So it can be higher than that.
Okay, okay, great. Thanks for touching on that. And for anyone who's not familiar with the concept of lifetime emissions, I will just mention that that has to do with sort of the manufacturing component all the way through to the end of life components. So life cycle, and we actually have some webinars if you're interested in learning more about that end of life component on our YouTube channel. Hopefully we'll get some manufacturing ones up down the road, but I appreciate you mentioning that solar and wind and storage actually have the lowest lifetime emissions, because I wasn't fully aware of that. You sometimes hear a lot of myths in Alberta, folks suggesting that that we have a lot of emissions in the manufacturing stage, and so it's good to know that relative to other energy sources, that's actually quite low. Okay, I see there are lots of questions coming into the Q&A now, so I have killed enough time with my definitions. Let's start with the most popular. And oh, I love our audience. You are also awesomely nerdy because we're going to dive right into numbers right off the start. During the power alert, what percent of the record 12 megawatts demand was industrial versus residential? That is, I'm really glad they're asking you that question and not me. Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is that we don't know right now. And I don't know that it will ever be an item that gets made public. But we are a heavily industrial province. So the residential component of the market is 17 to 20% of the market. And the rest is not just industrial, but industrial and commercial and institutional. So I assume that, and I know everyone's going to say, well, what does it matter if I turned off my lights, considering
Yes.
the heavy industrial load? And I can tell you that some industrials did curtail consumption as well. Will we have a full report on that from the system operator? I don't know. I think we should have a full report on the supply side of the market, but I'm not sure that they ever will really go into the demand details.
Yeah. I mean, that's always a question you have is what does it matter if I if I do anything? And I mean, at Solar Alberta and I think Canria, we're all just trying to do our part. And like Miss Betty said, even if we're just one, hummingbird trying to do our drop of water, it will make a difference eventually. And I do think there are reasons to make those decisions that go well beyond the impact that night. Just the fact that we set an example for the 4 children we were hanging out with that night. If they ever go on to operate industrial facilities, I like to think that'll make a difference too. So it's a cultural piece as well. And I appreciate you taking a stab at answering that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other piece to note there is that when you're 20 megawatts from the edge of having rolling blackouts, yeah, the residential customers all made a difference. Everybody made a difference, and it's really important that we helped out.
Yeah, stick together. Yeah, absolutely. Justin is wondering, what are the contingency reserves in Alberta? And I was wondering the same thing. When you say contingency reserves, do you mean the battery storage, or is there something else that you're talking about?
Yeah, so we buy a series of reserves in Alberta. I'm going to close this window so I'm not staring at everybody's questions moving back and forth. So we buy regulating reserve, and then we buy spinning reserve, and then supplemental reserve. We do that because we can't lose kind of large contingencies on the system. So we buy a prescribed amount of operating reserves to make sure that we back up our fleet.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful to understand. I love all these questions here. This is another good one. Is there, and I think I prepped you for this one. I knew it was coming your way because of the questions I get all the time, but is there a role for distributed home-based storage on the Alberta grid? Does the Alberta regulator have the ability to dispatch these resources? We do. Of 170 business members, the vast majority are installers. A lot of them are learning how to do, storage in homes and businesses, and are kind of wondering where we're headed with that. So if you could touch on that a little bit, we'd love to hear more.
Sure. So I will say that it's new and people are learning what to do with it. But there are kind of more smaller distributed storage that's coming online. And you'll see that when we release our data report. There's a spread between what we released and the 190 of utility scale storage. So there is some distributed storage already on the grid. So, really small generation under 5 megawatts, the ISO doesn't even see, right? It's negative load to them, or it's something that provides variability on the system, but they don't dispatch it, they don't control it, they don't even see it. So we're kind of in the infancy of what we can get that distributed storage to do. There is an element of aggregation that could be really useful to the system operator, not just the kind of the system operator, but also distribution systems going forward. You could see aggregators come in and sign up a series of different home-based storage units and use that as a virtual power plant or as a grid service. And I think that there's a lot of value available there. I don't think the products are clearly defined yet, and I don't think the need is clearly defined yet, but I would say watch this space. It's going to be a bigger and bigger deal.
Yeah, and we did have a session in the summer about microgrids, and one of the points that was made in the summer that I thought was really interesting is that they can be a really good setup with battery storage, especially for people who are vulnerable to electricity going offline. So especially for people with health issues and whatnot, where they really rely on electricity to survive. So that occurred to me because when we were at this risk of blackout, I think the people who are most alarmed were, of course, people whose lives depended on the electricity. I can sit with the candle on, which I won't because they have higher emissions than light bulbs. But anyways, we can sit in the dark for a while, but some people can't. And so there'll definitely will need to be a role for some of the storage in that way too, just to reduce the risk for vulnerable folks who are out there. So that was fascinating. I had never really thought about that. So we've been chatting a lot about that lately. Denise is wondering, where's the regulatory landscape at in terms of allowing electric vehicles to serve as storage into the grid during critical peak times? Yeah, that's interesting. I've certainly heard of folks doing that elsewhere. And I know when the Ford Lightning came out, I just saw one as a charging over nearby. It had a snow plow on front of it. I thought that was awesome. Anyways, I got thinking about that because I hear they have some capacity there that might be useful for storage, and a lot of these ones that are longer range might be useful. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a big topic. So vehicle to grid, and it's getting more and more attention. I would say the regulatory framework in Alberta is in its infancy, and it's not overly clear yet how these folks with EVs will be compensated for providing this value. And it's not overly clear how that will be managed and put back into the market. There have been pilot projects, but it's mostly related to time of use charging and how to really push the envelope on that. So most of the work that's been put in to date has been how to optimize the charging of electric vehicles, not the discharging back to the electricity system. And I'll just note that Ontario has introduced an ultra low overnight rate. So I did ask them if there were results of their kind of pilot program. It's not a pilot; they launched it full scale. Everybody can have the low overnight rate. If there were results yet, and there aren't, there isn't a kind of analysis of where they're at yet. But as soon as it becomes available, I'll scream that from the rooftops so people can see if that's working.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to know what's happening in other jurisdictions. I guess on a related note, does CanRIA include electric vehicles in your notion of storage, or is that sort of do they do their own thing?
Yeah, I would say we don't not include it, but we haven't seen it hit the point where there are a whole lot of entities ready to do it. And I think that is because the framework is in its infancy and there isn't a compensation mechanism that's very, very clear about how people would be compensated for it. But when it develops and if it becomes a big deal and if we have the ability to enable aggregators to optimize for that, I think it's, game on. All types of
Yeah,
storage.
great. Chris is wondering, and this is again kind of related to, we're on theme here. What role will the so-called smart grid play for leveraging behind the meter storage, such as electric vehicles, etc.? So, we hear a lot about things getting smarter. We had a nice presentation at the solar show last year about sort of a smart grid possibilities. But yeah, do you want to maybe touch on that and where things are at with respect to smarter grids?
I guess I'll just frame it this way. I think smarter grids will be very, very useful. And I'm a big proponent of demand participating, so load customers participating in energy markets in a way that benefits them, in a way that they can also be an asset in the energy market. What I think we need is pricing that makes sense and devices that can take advantage of that pricing. So it's been proven time and time again that people react to price signals. You can ask them nicely to do things, but if you put a price on it, people will do those things. So that's what we need for smart grids to be more effective at managing supply and demand in real time is a pricing regime that works for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say also, Alberta is a bit unique here. We have some of the flattest load, some of the flattest consumption, so everyone uses the same amount all the time in North America because we're so heavily industrial. And that means the swings aren't quite as profound as they are in other jurisdictions where there's really heavy air conditioning load on the high heat days in the summer. So we'll have to be very clever with how we set up a pricing regime that works for Alberta.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Lisa, and hello, Lisa, one of our very dedicated volunteers. There are 1.5 gigawatts of energy storage that are currently on pause due to the renewables moratorium in Alberta. How quickly do you think this can be built? I did note that when I looked at the queue in August, 30% of the solar in the queue had battery combined. And you and I discussed this earlier. I think, it does seem like we've put a lot of storage on hold along with the solar. Yeah, could you maybe comment on how we can get that built? And in general, I think you said, we need more storage. So I guess a broader question too is how can we get more storage on the system even beyond this moratorium?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with saying positive things and then I'll say negative things. So the positive things are, we need more storage on the system. And storage is really great when it's co-located with generation in what we would call a hybrid project because it manages the ramp rate. So these solar projects that are enormous and pretty exciting. And I mentioned earlier that the panels are on trackers, so they move with the sun and they optimize for the sun. And they can go from like full force to no sun in a 2-minute time period, and it's really impressive to look at. But that means that the generation in a hundreds of megawatt facility can drop by hundreds of megawatts in a 2-minute time period, and the grid's not ready for that. And sometimes when that happens, we end up pulling in power from British Columbia because we're not ready for that ramp. And I think storage is a great solution because it can actually help absorb absorb some of that ramp rate. So a lot of the new, particularly solar facilities, as you've mentioned, are applying with the ability to provide hybrid projects, so storage on site with the solar. And it doesn't just manage the ramp, it does a bunch of other things, but it does manage the ramp, which is great. So I do think that pausing all of those storage projects with the renewables is problematic. And I hope that all the good work that we're doing to try to resolve the pause on AUC project approvals will be lifted soon. I think there will be additional criteria, and I think it will be harder to get projects done in Alberta going forward. But I am optimistic that the government will see the value of the storage, particularly in light of how valuable the storage was when we really ran into trouble a couple weekends ago. And I hope we can resolve this issue in short order.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We do too. I know we are called Solar Alberta, but I always say we're solar and all things related. So that's why we really wanted you here today, because we heart wind, we heart storage too. Bruce has got a point here. So the moratorium aside, the airport city solar project at Fly EIA, Edmonton's airport, is 2 years behind original startup. Why does it take so long to get a project approved in Alberta? The compelling part of this project is it's designed to produce 20 times more power than the airport will use. So that has some significant potential that's waiting. So yeah, I guess approval timelines and how can we expedite those? Your last comment made me think we're maybe heading in the other direction right now, but what would you do in an ideal world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good and loaded question. Thank you for that. We need to do better. A question for the delays in project approvals is really a question for the Alberta Utilities Commission. And how do we make ourselves a jurisdiction that people want to build in, because we're very fast with approvals. So I don't have one answer for you, and I don't know that there is one answer for you. There's probably a collection of things that can add to getting projects built quite a bit faster. But I do hope that after this pause is lifted, there will be much more clarity for projects on what is required and when it is required. And I will also say that regulatory approvals and transmission access and customer connections are problems all over North America and all over the world right now. So there isn't necessarily one jurisdiction that's winning and doing it perfectly. There are lessons to be learned from other jurisdictions, but we're all struggling in the energy transition.
Yeah, while you're on the topic, I do want to touch on the transmission component. I know that, we don't have a lot of interties to other jurisdictions yet. We have a few, I think 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I understand that we need more transmission interties in order to make our grid more reliable and get to that net zero. I've heard Texas has an approach where if they believe if they build it, folks will come. So they'll build transmission lines to where they want power plants, solar, wind, or otherwise, and then folks build there. Do you think that's a technique that might work here? And also, where do you think we need those transmission lines the most, just to help with that reliability component? Assuming we can't rely entirely on batteries.
We'll need wires. And it's actually interesting because I, in my previous career, spent a lot of time scrutinizing wires costs. So now I'm on the other end of it, where I need wires to be built faster than they are being built. So people like to remind me of that on a regular basis. The Texas system can work. It could work in Alberta. It's an option. There's lots of different options on how we can build wires and pay for wires and allocate the costs associated with wires build. Right now in Alberta, we need probably about $2 billion worth of new transmission in southern Alberta and in central Alberta. And we need it to relieve congestion on the lines that exist. And also there are some transmission projects that we didn't, I would say, quite finish, or we didn't plan to get all the way finished, and we need to close the loop, so to say, in southern Alberta.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've actually heard of members of ours, they've tried to put forward projects like community generation projects, get a ways along, discover the grid can't accommodate the 2 megawatts that they want to put on it. So it's interesting because you touched on that earlier. A lot of places just can't receive what we want to offer them. I think often people think about transmission lines in the other way, in terms of the distribution component. But there's just that, how much energy can they, how much electricity can they take, and so it's a two-way sort of discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really complicated discussion. So oftentimes if you're connecting to distribution networks, that's a distribution level concern. So we divide it up at the 25 kilovolt limit. If you're less than that, your distribution. If you're more than that, your transmission in Alberta. And we have issues on both systems, and people are working very hard to alleviate these problems, but it's not unique to Alberta. It's happening all over North America in particular, where we've got to build more wires than we've ever built before. Large transmission projects take 5 to 7 years, maybe longer, depending on where you're trying to build. So you've got a mismatch in terms of the time to build assets. You can build wind, solar, and storage quite a bit faster than you can build transmission. So we have to start to get ahead of it. And the other problem we have in Alberta is that transmission costs here are really, really high. We built an enormous amount of transmission. My concern is that we largely did that to get coal-fired generation to market. So we put $17 billion into our electricity system. And now we're changing our electricity system. And we're going to need different wires, and we're going to need to build them in a hurry to try to get new types of generation that have really decreased in costs considerably in the past decade to market. So it's not an easy solution at all, and I can't kind of emphasize enough how complicated it's going to be to get the right price signals and build the right transmission going forward.
Yeah. I keep hoping that Alberta's the way that our government is agitating against some of the federal decisions in recent months. I keep hoping that maybe they're doing that because they're trying to get the feds to buy us more transmission lines. Let's assume that's the good intention behind all of the naysaying. But anyways, so we'll see where that goes. Smile is here. Hi, Smile. She's wonderful, and says hello to you and to me. As we speed our transition to solar and greenhouse gas emission reduction, will investment in solar manufacturing in Alberta provide the necessary capacity while reducing the transport-related GHG emissions associated with procuring solar panels overseas? Just curious, after hearing that the Manitoba government and RCT Solutions have signed a memorandum of understanding to advance a $3 billion solar manufacturing proposal in July 2023. Smile has a long background in manufacturing in Southeast Asia, so I'm not surprised to hear a manufacturing question. Thank you for bringing that up. Curious what your thoughts are on that, Vittoria.
Yeah, I don't have initial thoughts on that. I'd have to sit down and do run some numbers. But I do think, a couple of items. One is that there's quite a significant increase in manufacturing capability for solar in America due to the Inflation Reduction Act. So any manufacturing that would exist in Alberta would have to compete with that. And so we'd have to figure out a way to make it cheaper. And manufacturing ITCs that the feds have on the table is one of the options that we could use for that, but they haven't been implemented yet. We have to think about whether or not that manufacturing would be right-sized for our domestic demands or for export demands, and would we be able to get pieces of the market that American companies and international companies haven't already cornered.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. And, I was feeling very defeatist about that myself before I met Smile, because I thought, no, we can, there's no way we can compete. But then, when I met her and she said, well, I know how to do it, and so do my friends, so we can just get it done. And I thought, oh, that's true. Alberta's full of folks from parts of the world that have done lots of manufacturing. So I like to see what they can get up to here. And it's nice to know there are some possibilities for supports in place. I did see that the federal government's really getting behind EV manufacturing. So obviously they have an interest in some manufacturing. We might just have to expand that world a little bit. So thank you for that, though. I know it's very competitive. Another question here. Where are we with electricity generation from deep geothermal steam wells in Alberta? I recall seeing projects with 800 to 1,000 meter deep wells for this purpose. And I guess I'm going to actually relate that to one other question I had for you, Vittoria. You know, obviously a lot of enthusiasts, green enthusiasts, are excited about geothermal. They're excited about heat pumps. They're excited about all sorts of things. So I guess your thoughts on geothermal in Alberta, but also why does CanRIA kind of focus on wind, solar, and storage, and you know that trifecta? Why not also geothermal? That's my question, not this person's question, but I might as well tuck the two together.
Yeah, that's a totally fair question. It's a good question. You know, I'm personally pretty interested in geothermal, and the Everloop is an interesting project, and it's had quite a bit of attention recently. And I had the honor of serving on a panel with a woman from Ever earlier this year, last year, I guess. And so got to learn a little bit about that. We do wind, solar, and storage because we're the merger of the Wind Energy Association and the Solar Industries Association, and we took on the expanded mandate of energy storage because our members do energy storage, and it's really useful for both of our technologies, both of the other technologies. So we haven't expanded to geothermal yet. It's an option. We could expand to other types of renewables. We really are a member-driven association, so if our members want us to do that, that's what we'll do. But right now, I can tell you that I've got a full plate and a team that's running at capacity on wind, solar, and storage. So we'll see what the future brings. But I think geothermal is really interesting. I think heat pumps are really interesting. And what that will do to electrification is something I'm certainly reading about and monitoring, but it's not the main mandate of our association right now.
Yes, and I've been having some arguments with my members too, because I keep saying, you know, the public calls us about heat pumps. I need you to do heat pumps. And they keep saying, but that's mechanical, Heather, we're electrical. And I keep pushing back saying, please get a mechanical person too, because you know, it doesn't seem to matter whether a solar installer is primarily electrical. That's not how the consumer sees it, right? They see it as a package deal. The heat pump, if it's especially air source, obviously, you know, will enable them to have more solar. So they see it as a combo. So it is interesting how we navigate these challenges. So, and I know also in our directory, we've had an influx of roofing companies, and I thought, well, that's fascinating, but it makes perfect sense. They're expanding into solar, and so that's why I say we're solar related. And it's good to know that your title is broad enough that someday you might include all sorts of different technologies, and that possibility is there. Because I do think it's super important that we all play nice in the sandbox. And one of our objectives at Solar Alberta is really just to reduce green on green tension, and not allow folks to pit us against each other, because that's obviously just going to slow everybody down. So,
and I will say you've been great at that. Like we get on great, and we've been helping each other out, and we're all Albertans. So I think that's been working very well. The other thing I would say about this is, and I said it at the beginning of my presentation, I think it's really important that we take a system-wide approach to electricity, and we are all electricity people. So we need to think about how the whole system works, and that's not just wind, solar, and storage. That's everything. That's all the assets on the system.
absolutely. And what you and I have talked about, and why we work so well together, I think, is because we do tend towards the residential and commercial, though we care about solar farms and other things too. And you folks tend to be with the big players a lot, and you do still care about installers and others too. But we definitely have kind of our areas of focus. So on that topic, you mentioned the 48 terawatt hours, that would be enough solar on behind the meter sort of homes and businesses and whatnot to allow for electrification of the grid. I'm just wondering, when you mentioned that number, does that include, you know, the electrification of home heating? Does that include vehicle charging? Like, assuming we transition our whole fleet of cars in Alberta, assuming we transition our homes and electrify them, do you think 48 terawatt hours, is that enough, or are we going to need more given that?
Yeah, so it's a forecast based on what kind of electricity we will need in 2050 to be net zero. So that should include all the things that will transition us to electrification. But one of the ways that I've been thinking about that number, because it's sort of abstract unless you work in electricity and throw terawatt hours around on a regular basis, is from a rooftop solar perspective. If we just look at rooftop solar, we're right now at around 1 in every 200 houses, and we need to get to around 1 in 3. So that's
Okay.
that. I think Jeff McCauley from Charge Solar always says, "Talking rooftops." That's how people think. So shout out to Jeff.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful and
Um,
really interesting. And really, if you think about the picture you showed us, southern Alberta probably needs to get to 1 in 1, because there were some parts of northern Alberta where the resource isn't quite as good. So we're going to probably need more in some parts to offset those parts that are a little. I had to notice that Fort McMurray looked like it might have been out of the green zone, which made me a little bit sad, because I know we had some Fort McMurray joining us tonight, and so I was thinking, gosh, I wish they weren't in the I wish they were in the green zone. Hopefully, with some of the incentives that are in place right now, that can make it more affordable as well for folks up north. Any comments on for the northerners who might be here tonight? For you, Victoria, do you have any thoughts on the north?
Sorry, I thought you were asking for
No,
comments.
no. I'm
Um,
not sure if there are enough here for them to get enough upvotes, actually. So I'm just speaking up on their behalf.
oh, okay. Um, you know, I think lesser solar regimes is solar is still energy that we're getting from the sun, and it's low cost and low carbon. So um, it really depends on the customer and what they want, and what they're willing to pay for. I'm a big advocate of energy efficiency as well, and I do think when you make the decisions about what you can do in your home, you really need to look at all of them. It's not just, oh, I'm going to put solar on my roof. It's going to have better insulation in my attic, and I'm going to make sure I have the best appliances I can get my hands on. So there's a whole lot of decisions that homeowners have to make when it comes to their energy use. And events like we had a couple of weeks ago is a good reminder of, we have this great system that we sometimes take for granted. We don't assume we're going to have rolling blackouts. We're going to have electricity when we flick the switch, and we're lucky to have that. But you have to make decisions about what your willingness to pay is, and what your carbon footprint is going to be, and the choices are only going to get more interesting and more complicated going forward. So
Well, that's true. Yeah.
yeah.
No, there's lots of factors to consider. So I appreciate you touching on that. And actually, speaking of folks we shouldn't be fighting with, the energy efficiency folks are another demographic we shouldn't be fighting with. And so
No,
I appreciate you mentioning that, because we are advocating hard with our friends with various energy efficiency organizations, and we don't want to let folks pit us against each other, because that's a great way to bring us all down. So thank you for touching on that as well. We are just about at time here. So what I want to say is we haven't gotten to all the questions. And is there a good way for folks to reach out to CanRIA in general if they want to follow up with some additional questions? Maybe just a link to your website, or what would you recommend if folks have additional questions that we couldn't get to this evening?
Yeah, that's a good one. We have a communications web email, so it's communications@renewablesassociation.ca. Don't forget the S in renewables. And that's one way to reach us. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's the only social media platform that I think is working for me right now. So if you want to become my friend on the internet, that's another way to reach me directly. But if you also contact Heather, she can find me. So that's another tactic to ask additional questions. I really appreciate everyone's interest today.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I really hope that some of these questions as well will be answered through the next 9 sessions we're hosting this week, so that you don't have to answer every question alone. But thank you for taking on so many of them. You really covered a lot of topics today. Phenomenal questions. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for our audience to be so thoughtful today. Of course, to Enbridge, our sponsor, we really appreciate that. Ms. Betty wonderful remarks today to get us started. And of course, Vittoria, I see all the thanks coming into the chat now for you, and just applause, and really appreciate you taking the time out for free to do this for us today. And if any of you are wondering how we make this affordable, it's both through our sponsors and also through our wonderful presenters and partners who are helping to make this accessible to all Albertans and beyond. So thank you, Vittoria. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. We will be sending out a recording of this in the weeks to come, and Vittoria will be on our YouTube channel, so you can always rewatch her graphs there if you're really excited about graphs like we are. So have a great evening, everyone.